Hi, this is James, and this is the second episode of Solo Dad, Amateur Widower. And I thought for this particular episode, I would talk about what I did to re enter normal life, or one of the things I did to kind of re enter, I say normal life, but move into that phase of carrying forward. And so, what I'm speaking to is kind of in that those months after I lost my wife. And so I lost my wife in 2020 after a 27-month long battle with a very aggressive blood cancer. And so when she passed, there was a period of time where from the bereavement period, and I was and in that time there's a lot of things you do. And if you are watching this video, and you're from that widow perspective, you understand what those things are, the final arrangements and the services and the goodbyes. And then when the business of passing, the traditions and the order of things is resolved, there's a day you wake up when the last phone call is made, and the last plans of preparation, or the event of a funeral has taken place. You wake up one morning and you realize, oh my gosh, this is the forward. There's no more of the work of grieving, the business of grieving to do. Now it's a time to live and to live forward. And it's a confusing and it's a difficult time, right? This is where those days of the loneliness kind of kick in and you realize the aloneness. So one thing I did is realize I was a recipient of a tremendous amount of grace from my employer. And they had given me a lot of latitude, a lot of coverage to kind of be there and be there for my wife, be there for my family, but also, I also did my job, right? Did it well and worked hard, but it was a really good balance. Getting back into now normal life, or the go forward life, I realize now I have two children and they require care. They've lost their mother. There's things that have to go on. This was in the period of COVID, and actually right into what would have actually normally just been a summer break. And so I decided I needed full help here at the home for a period of time. Distractions play, and this wasn't something. And I have my in-laws and my parents, so grandmas and grandpas were aplenty. But you know what? I decided I wanted my kids to have some fun, right? And so I went and I made a decision. I was going to hire a nanny. Now, this was not a full-time situation. I was like, I want my kids to have someone to keep them active. And this is what you find in kids who are grieving, right? Kids, where we as parents and adults grieve differently than children. And having had a chance to watch it and see it, for me, sometimes the grief was what you'd expect from grief: sitting, silence, anguish, anxiety, tears, exhaustion, all those things. And sometimes for kids, what they want is fun. They want distraction. They want activity. And so I had to get back to work. I had to make a choice to kind of be in this place of normalcy to move forward. And as you're going to discover in future videos, so much of what I did is just, at the time I felt like this is absolutely the right way to do it. This is the perfect way to do it. And then you get a couple of months into it and you realize, oh, that was wrong. Or, my attitude was not the right attitude. But that is kind of the experience of loss, whether it's divorce, it's death. You're in a place where you're confused, and you will make decisions and go down paths that feel right. And it's not to say they're not right, but they're, in the permanency of that decision may not ultimately pan out, or that the permanency of that thought process, or that direction you feel like you need to go, or that direction, or that place you feel like you need to be, it may not actually ultimately be what you wind up committing to, or something that winds up being very solid path. So going back to the beginning, right? So decide I'm going to bring in a nanny. And I went the path of care.com, right? I joined the membership, and I want to say, I can't remember the time. I want to say it was like $130 for the year. And I went through, and in my mind, right, this is a summertime. I need to be able to focus on work, focus on the house, just focus on all the work, the multiplied things that are now on my plate, and keep my mind focused on moving forward, while at the same time giving my kids an avenue for fun, right, and for distraction and letting off steam, and to keep them occupied, because I just didn't want them sitting in their rooms during a summer break, during COVID lockdowns, just sitting in grief. And so I went on care.com, and I set up interviews with nannies, or potential nanny candidates. And really what was important to me, or what mattered to me, was what I was looking for was someone who was, one, going to be responsible, that was going to reflect kind of our values. And listen, the values that I talk about reflecting were that they were going to demonstrate decency, and they were going to demonstrate kindness. I didn't want someone who was going to be swearing around my kids. At the time that my wife passed away, my daughter had literally just turned 10. She was only a couple weeks into being a 10-year-old, and my little boy was 8 years old. So they had just progressed from second grade and fourth grade into the summer break. So I wanted just a good, clean role model, and I wanted someone that was going to energetic and fun, and was going to be active with them. And so I went and interviewed a number of candidates. And so here's some tips on how to do it. Number one, right, message and exchange through the app. Did that a number of times, right? Found some folks who kind of really reflected, I felt like would reflect kind of the values, and it would be good, responsible stewards and protectors of my kids, and also that were seemed to be the people that had the appropriate level of energy. I did disclose in my posting for the position that, listen, this is a single dad household, a widowed fathered household, because the last thing I wanted to do was to have, frankly, the reality is most of the candidates that I was interacting with, or that had responded to my ad, were all young women, right? And I'm very cautious and guarded about the fact, or protective of the fact of, protect is not the right word, cautious of appearances, and cautious of where people's concerns may be, as far as coming into a place where there's just a single man, a single dad. And so I was just very upfront in the postings with these young women. Hey, listen, this is this is a single father household. I work from home. I'm here a lot. And I just want you to be okay with that, right? So it was their choice, and it wasn't something that sprung upon them, because also even just the fact that they're stepping into a situation to care for kids where there was a recent loss could be a very heavy thing. And I didn't want any surprises, and I wanted someone who was going to do this to be comfortable in that situation. And so wound up coming up with a number of great candidates, and set up interviews at Starbucks. Did not do the interviews at my house, did the interviews at Starbucks, met a couple of really great young people, and ultimately it came down to a decision of two really amazing young women. One who's still a very good friend of our family's. He was had just gotten out of her 4 years in the Army, in her early 20s, was looking to start school soon, and was looking for some work to do. Ultimately went with her, and she was amazing, right? And so starting out, and this is again just tips for, this is something I did, and this may work for you. I said, listen, we're going to start at a minimum of just a set schedule of 2 days a week, for a minimum of 4 hours, potential to go over. I think I want to say the set pay was about, I want to say I did $18 an hour is what I had paid the individual, and we just did this for a couple of months, and it was not much money, and just had set a pre-schedule for the next couple of weeks. And then, if the kids wanted to have some friends over, the nanny would coordinate, and we'd have some pool parties, and that way I just got to come and sit and work and focus. I was also very, very, good about staying out of the space of the nanny, staying here, because again, it's a little bit of that. Listen, guys have a reputation, or there's a concern that, hey, as a single dad is going to be hovering or making a young woman uncomfortable. And so I just never wanted that to be, I never wanted anyone to feel uncomfortable in my home. I was just very clear with her, hey, listen, and this is something that I want to just put out on the table. And again, it's the things that you feel like you have to do in that situation, because the whole world doesn't make sense to you anymore, right? Oh my gosh, I was up until a couple weeks ago, I was a married guy, and now I got this young woman in my house. I need to put up all the, I need to, put up all the disclosures and all the caution, and be overly sensitive to what everyone's perceptions might be, because you don't know how, you imagine how they're going to perceive things. Well, 3 years later, I'd probably do things differently. I wouldn't make such a big deal of the fact that I'm going to keep my separate space. But anyhow, so had a nanny, and I'll tell you what, it was actually honestly an amazing resource to be able to have someone come into the home, be able to make meals for the kids, play with them, engage with them, help them do their laundry, host friends for them. And again, I'm mindful of the fact that, when you lose someone, there's the practical matter of expenses come into play, and things are expensive. And maybe you might be hearing this and going, God, I don't know if I have the money for a nanny. And just so happens that I happened to be able to budget it accordingly, and was able to do it. But for me, in my particular situation, it actually turned out to be a tremendous transition support system for me, for my kids, because sometimes you can get lost in your own grief and you forget that your kids are out there grieving as well. But to have someone on hand to be able to go and help them, play with them, engage with them, bond with them, connect with them, laugh with them, do Nerf wars, and have friends over, and also be a good role model for them, turned out to be a really great experience for my kids, and for me as well. And actually, as I may have mentioned, this girl is now kind of a friend of our family's, and we just had her for a couple of months. But if you find yourself in this situation, loss, divorce, there's a lot on you. A lot of your life has been changed. You've been uprooted. Your whole vision of self and your identity and your plan for your future it's been shaken, right? Now, and you'll hear me say this expression a lot. When two people are married, right? The pastor says, and two become one, or the pastor, the officiant say, two people become one. And God, you know what? Sometimes it just feels like you think those are just words, and no, it's not just words. Those are real. So when you've lost your partner, you are all of a sudden one half of something that was whole. You're one half of something that was something bigger, something fuller. And I know a lot of people find themselves in the situation of solo parenting, single parenting, through a lot of hurt, and it's typically not a joyful thing, right? And so there's all this. Everyone's situation is different coming into this place that we find ourselves. But with that hurt that brought us to this place, we find ourselves sometimes lost in our own grief, our own confusion. And one of the things that was important for me, and I think it's important for maybe those of you watching this to realize, that our children are also grieving. And maybe it wasn't a death, maybe it was a divorce, it was a separation, it was something else, and they're grieving too. And there's a lot of unknowns for them. Their identity of family, their identity of their safety, their identity of, or their awareness of their protectors and their nurturers, that's all been uprooted as well. And they're confused and they're hurt and they're lost. And so having resources available to them, so that they can thrive and heal and grieve and live, and having a support for that, so that you can also step away sometimes and grieve and thrive and live and stare at the wall and watch YouTube videos and find distractions so that you can process. I think it was an important thing. It was a critical thing. So if you find yourself in the situation where there's been loss, and maybe it wasn't just recently, maybe it was some time ago, it was divorce, you're just parenting by yourself. You know what? There might be a value for you in just seeing if it's within budget to pull in a resource just for a couple of hours a week, maybe if you could, to give yourself a moment, right? And so when I first hired our nanny, you know what? Some of my moments when she was here watching the kids was me just to go to the cemetery down the street and just to sit and water my wife's lawn, the new sod on her gravesite. And I was able to do that and not worry about my young kids being at home. I was able to grieve while they were playing. Because so often in our situations, when we're grieving, our kids are forced to kind of face the grief. And sometimes what kids want is to play. And I can say this, before my wife passed, I'd read an article about, I knew she was passed, it was coming soon. And I'd read an article about children and the effect of what it was going to be like for them. And one article I read was, don't be surprised if your kids are playing at the funeral. And you think, oh, that's unconscionable. How could they play at a funeral? Fast forward to my wife's funeral, and after the service, my kids wanted to run around and explore. They had just buried their mom, and I'm sitting there weeping and devastated, and the family's devastated, and the kids wanted to play. And the truth is, that's kids. That's nothing about my kids. My kids love their mother with every bit of them. But play for kids is important. Adults, we don't play when we grieve, right? Whether it's just that's just not how we're wired, or it feels disrespectful, or there's too many responsibilities or burdens on us, we just don't play. They need to. It's something that's important to them. So maybe it's not a nanny, maybe it's an aunt, it's an uncle, it's an older teenager from church that you trust, it's a neighbor's kid that you've known for a long time and they're vetted and they're safe, that you can just bring in to play, right? Or you invite your kids' friends over and play. And I'll tell you something, having the kids' friends over, even when it wasn't the nanny, it was just me and their friends. Sometimes hosting kids and hosting their shenanigans and their laughter and their goofballness and having Nerf wars with kids. I'll tell you what, when you're a grieving dad, whipping out some Nerf guns and chasing down kids in your house and having Nerf wars, sometimes that's the best grief medicine you'll ever find. So, like I said, this is, going down the path of a nanny. It actually kind of was a good thing for me. Care.com was a great resource. Interview, be open, be open with prospective candidates about the home situation. If you are now a single man watching this and decide you want to get a nanny, listen. I'm just going to say, don't be that guy, right? Don't hover. Give them their space. Don't make them uncomfortable. Because listen, and this is just the practical side of it, right? You're a man and you've lost your partner, and sometimes that absence of companionship, there's loneliness, there's a lot of things that can kind of come into your heart in those situations. And you know what? You just have to recognize, listen, I'm going to put some boundaries out and let that nanny be there for the kids. That's their entertainment, and just, and do your own thing, get your work done, find your distractions, take that as a moment to go to the gym, to take a walk, to do those things that you need to do for yourself, for your own healing, for your own joy, so that your kids can get their joy and that you together can all heal. Find someone that reflects your values, find someone that's going to be safe, that's going to be responsible, that's going to protect your children, that's going to be a good role model for them. And just be very clear on what the expectations are. I wrote up a contract for, I think actually I got a sample nanny contract online, but I modified it. I said, hey, listen, we don't, not swearing in front of the house, nothing, no inappropriate clothing. Also, no social media. I didn't want the person posting anything about my home or my kids or their activities online, right? And that's all stuff to be very mindful of. So when you go to post an article, you explain the situation, explain the hours, identify kind of what hours, what blocks of time works for you. And you're actually going to find a number of great candidates out there with a lot of experience that are used to working with kids, and share with, and just set expectations up front about what the behavior is supposed to be like. And then cut them loose to have some fun. So again, the kids having fun is their healing. You having your kids be taken care of is part of your healing. So again, I appreciate your time. Thank you for watching, and look forward to more videos in the future. All right. I hope you all have a great day.